Welcome, everyone, to episode 62 of Underserved, our last one of season 5. With me today in studio is Doug Morgan, Senior Director of Engineering at Alteryx. Let's get started.
Welcome to this week's edition of Underserved, the podcast for the rest of the tech industry, where we focus on stories of tech industry leaders, their insights, and their lessons learned. And now, your host, Andrew Gelina.
Thank you, Doug, for coming down today and joining us to record Underserved.
Thanks for having me here. It's going to be great.
So way back in the day, your dad has a Tower Mac. Is that the first time you touched technology?
We always had computers at home. I think it was a Mac. Maybe it was a PC. But yeah, one of my first memories is just doing stuff on the computer. You know, the old, I'm sure our kids won't remember this, the dial-up tone from way back in the day. I remember that very distinctly, doing all sorts of fun stuff. So yeah, that was my first memory of technologies way back then.
The siren song of the modem whistle.
Of course, and it's remarkable what our kids get to enjoy now, as they would say.
Do you start programming in middle school or high school at all?
It was high school was the first time I think I did real programming in some computer science classes all through middle school, elementary school, a lot of video games. My thing growing up, N64 at Christmas was one of the pivotal highlights of a Christmas one year that I'm sure my parents will remember fondly. But yeah, I got to high school, always like computers, said, let's do computer science, right? Took the courses. I think there was 3 or 4 in high school, and I just loved them. I did computer science competitions. So we go to like universities and your time, you got to do all the things. And that was just a lot of fun. I love doing it.
Now, you had an exceptionally good CS instructor, right?
Yes. He was, just great at teaching, period. He also was on, I think, what are the AP committees for the computer science exams. So very good at teaching, but very well recognized. It was just very good to have this like a world-class computer science teacher. So set us up well.
Well, you lucked out.
Yes.
So where do you end up applying to school, and where do you go to school?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to get out of Maryland as much as I could. Though, I did apply to University of Maryland, Terps, but I want to get out of the state. I don't think I applied to any West Coast. I didn't want to go that far away. I did sort of the East Coast circuits. It's like the MIT, RIT, CMU. I ended up getting into Georgia Tech, which was a computer science school. Very good at math and SAT. I guess they call it verbal or writing, whatever it was at the time. It's like, yeah, good room for improvement, as they would say. But it was fine for Georgia Tech. And I don't grow up in Maryland. I became a big sports fan, like a big Ravens fan in middle school, plus minus. I don't know. It's a little fuzzy, but I don't think when I was choosing colleges, it's like one best computer science school. I don't think I valued the Georgia Tech and the ACC. I went to all the football games. I think if I'd gone into MIT, it would have been fine. I would have enjoyed it too, but I really enjoyed the also sports aspect of it. I just thoroughly enjoyed my time at Georgia Tech. So that was great.
Yeah, when I was at UMass, I was with the Calipari years, so basketball was awesome. The lacrosse team was pretty good. That was a lot of fun. It was an unexpected plus.
No, yeah, I mean, it was... Anyway, speaking about sports in a while, but yeah, I was there when Calvin Johnson was there. The basketball team had just come off that national championship experience. I think it was in 2005. The Tech was in the national championship and lost, but it was like, yes, big basketball, all the big Duke games. It was cool.
So I imagine CS probably wasn't too tough if you had been working with the AP CS guy for a couple of years in high school.
I think I tested out of a class or two. I think whatever the AP exams, but yeah, I think the first year or two was not particularly difficult until we got to the things that we didn't cover, like the C in low-level systems design, which I'd never had experience for. I was like, oh, this is cool, but I had to learn that. But when we were doing like Java and object-oriented programming and data structures, I was like, I kind of know all these things. So which is great. Don't get me wrong. It was nice to be able to not have to be so stressed out in the freshman or sophomore years until I sort of ramp up. But yeah, it worked out well.
What was your favorite CS course that you took as an upperclassman?
I think it was probably the video game design course, because I talked about like, yeah, I want to do video games, right? When I was young, I was like, oh, I get to make a video game. It was really neat. And also, after having done it, it was cool. And I realized I never want to make video games because that is incredibly tedious to do those things. And I am not that sort of person who could be that tedious in things. So it was good, awesome to take. Glad I took it. So I know I did not want to do that.
Sometimes learning what you don't want to do is as valuable as learning what you do want to do.
I thoroughly agree.
Speaking of that, did you do any internships or anything while you were in school?
Yeah, I interned at Google twice. Once in the New York City office working on Google Checkouts. I think it's a now defunct product. And then in the Mountain View office working, I guess it would be in the hardware team, but I was working on like hard drive security software. And so that was some pretty cool internships. Then I went to get a full-time job. You do the circuit, right? Didn't get a job at Google. There was some nonsense there with my boss. It's neither here nor there now, but I did interviews at Apple, Adobe, Amazon, Facebook, I don't know, like the big tech circuit. Airbnb didn't exist back then. All the other cool companies. Landed at Adobe in college in the San Jose office. Now wife and I got in the car and took the Camry, 3,000 miles from Maryland to California. It was a fun drive.
So what were you working on at Adobe?
The first team I joined, the team I was hired to join was internal productivity tools team. So we helped, this is back when Adobe, I guess they still make software they ship on disks, but back then it was still a disk software, right? You bought Photoshop and it came in like on a CD, right? So you needed software to help take the images in the software from what the developers made and put it on, burn it onto a disk. So our team built all that internal tool software that actually helped do that. That was fun. I really enjoyed it. One of the reasons I joined that team was because the interview process, I met all the guys and in the team, and it was sort of really, I just really enjoyed it. It was like, oh yeah, this is a bunch of people my age, and it's super fun, and it was great. I think it was 5 or 6 months in. This is like fall 2009. Adobe had a layoff round. I wasn't laid off. I was moved teams to different team at Adobe that I was not a huge fan of. Like the team itself and then what they were doing was like fine, but then my office was, I was living in downtown San Jose and like, oh, this team's in downtown San Francisco. So you get to get on a train 1 hour each way every day or an hour and a half. I'm like, I'm sitting on a train 2 hours a day for something I'm like not super thrilled about. Like, yeah, I'm not gonna stay here. So yeah, but it happens.
You are listening to the Underserved podcast. Underserved is produced by Syrinx, the developer-founded, developer-run software consulting company. For more information, visit syrinx.com. That's SYRINX.com.
I'm not sure they still ship bits on physical discs. Like I looked online the other day and the only thing I saw was pay us every month
the
in
cloud
perpetuity.
Experience. You got to get that subscription revenue. That's the thing now.
That's everyone's dream. I mean,
Yeah.
Microsoft did a good job of it with Office 365 and pretty much every creative person I know curses Adobe for having to pay that money every month.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So speaking of subscription revenue, it was a good pivot. So then looking for a job, wanted to go work at a startup in Silicon Valley. There's a couple startups out there. I don't know if you've heard. And so I ended up getting a job at SurveyMonkey. I think it was employee, like, I don't know, somewhere in the 30 to 40 range, like mid 30s, right prior to my joining, I think about a year before that, because the founder of the company had been some brothers and they are in Portland, Oregon. They sold a majority portion to some private equity firms and they sort of rebooted the company in the Silicon Valley. So I joined as sort of the first wave of hires there. Super cool. Entered as an engineer, went to tech lead and sort of manager by the time I left. That was some very super cool times at SurveyMonkey.
What was your learning experience like there? Like what, usually your second job, especially at a company that's growing that quickly, there's a bunch of lessons learned. What did you learn while you were there?
A lot. So I'll talk about some more specifics, but maybe more broadly, going into that experience, I'd always wanted to start my own thing at some point in time, but you could just jump in and do it. I thought it'd be particularly helpful. I can go somewhere to learn a lot of things, not only just in engineering, right? So because we were small, I was able to benefit from talking to people in product and marketing and analytics and sort of all the other departments to learn. So I learned a lot, just interactions with them. You may be more specific in engineering. Maybe schools have evolved since I went to school over a decade ago. It's like, or maybe 15 years ago. It's like a long time ago at this point. But in school, like you learn a lot of fundamentals of computer science, algorithms and data structures and the sort of like, and there's like, I think I took a software engineering class in college and it was basically like, oh, here's how you build requirements documents. That's basically how that class worked. But when you get to like real world, as a startup, how do you like bundle up software, deploy it, test it, make sure it's running in the wild? How do you monitor it? All the things that what you do to build software today. You don't learn, at least in my experience in college, we didn't learn a lot of that. So there's a lot of learning of that sort of stuff on the job. So that was the biggest experience. By doing that and deploying things, you also, you have unintended consequences sometimes, right? I think I took down production at least once with some bad code because, we didn't always have the right things to simulate load in our pre-production environments. So you get to production, you're like, oh yeah, that one little lookup you did. Well, if it's hit a couple hundreds of thousands of times a second, not good. But it's fine in dev, right? And so you learn some things as you go. It wasn't too bad.
I think it's essential to learn and make some mistakes on someone else's dime if you can, right out of school.
Yes. Yeah, it's like, you live and you learn. It wasn't too bad of a downtime. You can quickly revert some things and roll it back.
Now that you've got some experience, what do you do next? Do you go to a startup?
Yeah, I mean, my mom is an entrepreneur actually, and her sister is too. And so I always like looked at that, be like, hey, I realized I'm young, didn't have any kids at the time, right? But I'm married, so it's like, hey, if now is a time to go start a company or do a startup, be a co-founder, then would be a opportune time, right? Because doing it aside, what I found, just sort of semi-intentionally, but it really was after that, was like, oh, this was a really good idea. It was like a support structure is really key when you're like being a founder at home, but like someone I could talk to. The thing called pay and benefits and healthcare turns out are like really important to have. And if you don't have that, it could be, it was already difficult enough. I can imagine people who've gone through it just like being solo at home, like being particularly difficult. So it was a very good at times, sort of the personal sense. And then also, I've been talking to various companies who like needed co-founders, right? You do this co-founder dating thing, right? To go find people. I had some of my own ideas too. I eventually get introduced to Jade Van Doren, who I started Hop On with in a second. And I think a friend of a friend introduced us, and I can't even remember the exact details, but started hanging out. It was like a perfect match. And he had this idea, and he started a previous tech company called Tech Forward that had an exit, was successful, and he was moving from LA to San Francisco. And the idea which struck home to me at the time was this sort of travel reimagined sort of concept, because I remember at this point in my life, I'm 25, 26, something like that. I travel and do trips with the wife and friends and stuff. And at that time, and it still is somewhat today, is like, you go to Kayak, nothing wrong with Kayak, right? Or Expedia and the like. And it's just, we always felt like you could do a better job than that. Can you be very mobile, social, this is where the people of my age are, right? They're just on their phones. Desktops aren't a thing, right? So how can we build an experience that targeted those people, those customers? We said, okay, well, maybe we can do that. But the reality is, if we're not going to go head to head with Expedia, because they have this thing called Lots of Money and they can buy ads, do the things, right? So how could you get into that market? And so we said, hey, well, could we build something that's like very group travel social focus? Because at the time, also 4 or 5 years out of school, everyone's getting married, right? And there's bachelor parties and bachelorette parties, and planning these things is just the worst. You're just like email chains from hell back and forth, right? And we said, can we just build an app? And then that helps, and there's usually 1 or 2 people who actually organize the thing. It's the best man or whatever, right? Or if you want a group trip, there's usually that one poor person who's like, I'm the most responsible. Fine, I'll book it and plan it, right? Can we give that person a tool that says they can plan it in our app and then turn on, just share it to everyone else who can then just book that thing in 2 taps? And so that's what we built and shipped. I think we raised about $1 million from NEA and a bunch of angels, hired a very small team, 3-4 people. And we did it, and we built it, and we launched the first version.
So to launch it, what'd you guys end up doing to kind of get some traction?
When you're building that sort of application, it's like social, group travel, this thing, what would you do? You would try to get people to use your app to go do something, right? And so we said, why don't we do a Vegas launch party, right? So we just said, hey, we're having this party in Vegas. Ticket is $20, but you have to use the app to buy the ticket. So if you're there, you might as well book your flight and hotel. I think we did it at the Wynn or the Encore. I think we got a DJ, an open bar, the sort of stuff you do when you're 25, 26, right? We had a great time. Thoroughly enjoyed that.
That's a great excuse for a launch party that actually drives revenue.
Well, we got revenue, we got bugs, which is fine. We learned a lot about people using the software, a lot of the metrics. It was great. Our usage spiked a lot, just very good from a product-driven growth, right? And the whole point of the we were trying to go for that viral factor, right? And I'm trying to remember the product metrics we had. At one point, our viral score was 2. So every one person that gets it books something, they invite 2 people who also. So we were trying to really pump that, because that CAC is 0. Right, essentially, or you get for the people after that. So that's the best way we can compete, is having the lowest CAC possible. And so that is what the attempt was there.
CAC is customer acquisition cost?
Yes. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, there's a lot of TLAs in technology, 3-letter acronyms.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this reminds me of it's the virtual Jason Curcio. Jason Curcio was a guy we knew when I was at Monster that would coordinate the trips. Hey guys, want to go on a cruise? But then trying to herd the cats and get everyone to book and get everyone to pay and do all that. This sounds like the way to optimize that whole experience.
Yeah. And there have been lots of startups who've tried to do this, and obviously we were one, and none has broken out a lot yet. Our theory of the case, because a lot of the businesses You either have to, if you're in travel, you're either getting the content and you're referring out and you get the referral fee if someone like books it or whatever. Our theory of the case was we want to do a full service integration. So what that means is that we actually we had an agreement with Sabre and all the providers. So we would do the full life cycle of the booking. So, if your flight changed, we'd tell you and acknowledge it and do all this sort of stuff. Was that a huge pain? Sure, of course it was, but we thought it'd provide the best customer experience possible. The flip side of that is also that sort of what's enabled our acquisition to Lola later, because one of the things we were going to raise the A, and it was going so. One of the things that we got into Paul English as part of that process, and we talked to Bill O'Donnell and sort of the crew there, is that our technology, all acquiring companies, especially at the size they're buying a smaller company, they probably don't care about the product. Let's be real, right? They care about the people and maybe the technology, which is what happened in this case, right? It was myself, another engineer who decided to move as part of the acquisition. This was fall 2015, I think this happened. But our entire travel search, booking, fulfillment backend was basically it was a service. Great. It was on Amazon, right? So just great, drag and drop, right? And so that sort of helped Lola get off the ground quickly in that regard.
I know Paul English is a big fan of the launch party.
Yes. No, it was good. We had a lot of great parties at Lola. It was a fascinating. We had these big open area and there were lots of desks, and you go in there monitors, but all the desks, everything had wheels on them that could lock. So this back room, so you could push all of the desks and everything, and they had a professional sound system and stage, so you could convert the startup area, the work area, into a DJ party area. I don't know, in an hour. It was kind of nuts. So it was cool. It was a fun time.
That's kind of cool.
Thank you so much for joining this Zoom panel interview for our software development position. My apologies for having to reschedule it 7 times.
Hey, no worries. Ready to get this underway.
Let me introduce the panel members from our company. First is...
Whoever that is, can you please mute?
Sorry, that was me. Mailman's here.
Hey, you guys hear me? You see me? My kid is playing Fortnite and my bandwidth is sapped.
Hey, sorry, I was on mute. Hi, this is Connor Walton.
Can everyone who is not talking please mute yourself?
Sorry, so where were we?
Yeah, so the main reason I joined was to let you know that I accepted a job offer from your competitor this morning. Sorry, your process just took too long. Laters.
Does this drill sound all too familiar to you? If so, you should call Syrinx. Syrinx helps you complete your projects on time and on budget. So stop the Zoom calls and start shipping code today. Call us at 888-579-7469 option 1 or email us at sales@syrinx.com. That's sales@syrinx.com.
I met Paul a long time ago, 07, 08. There was this thing called the Auto Club, OTTO. It was fractional luxury car rental type thing. You joined the club and you could take out Lamborghinis and Ferraris. And they would have these parties at the clubs, and now the Seaport. He was at every one of them. He absolutely loved that.
I could see that. I guess in Bill O, his co-founder too, is also a big car guy. So I would imagine maybe he's a little bit more low-key than Paul English is. So maybe he was probably there too.
So what do you end up doing after you ride out your time at Hopon/Lola?
Yeah. After that, I joined a startup called TetraScience. I joined right before they raised, and I think literally I started the week prior to the A being signed. I guess it was an A. I don't know what round it was. When I joined, it was in the sort of lab monitoring, utilization, scheduling space, building software to help in the lab space. I think it was halfway through, the company pivots into this more data informatics space, which is what their big product is today. Like every pivot, rough waters. And so, that being said, TetraScience has done credit where credit is due with Patrick Grady, the CEO, and I think Spin, who's still there. They have navigated those waters pretty successfully, and they're doing great now. So kudos to them. During that time, so I think I'm there about a year and a half, something like that. And then after that, I go to work again for Bill O'Donnell. He goes by Bill O. He CTO of Lola. At some point after I left, he exits Lola and he goes to take a EVP job at a company called Blink Health. It's a startup in the healthcare space. Headquarters in New York City, but we had a Westford office because they wanted to recruit Bill. So I go work for Bill again because I love working for Bill. He's awesome. Riding that out for about a year and a half before startup shenanigans happen at lots of startups. So I decide, it's time for me to move on from Blink Health at some point. And then I joined Zipcar in the fall of 2019.
Yeah, and you met Shanker, who we both know.
Yep.
I worked with him at Agiro way back in the day. So you end up working with him at Zipcar?
Yes. And that was fun. I mean, and after I'm at Blink Health for a while, at that point I say, hey, I have two kids at that point in time. Maybe we're thinking more kids. It's like startups are fun. You have uniquely startup problems, which I could enumerate, and I've been through lots of them. I just said, hey, maybe let's take a break from that for a little bit. And what would be something maybe a little bit more stable look like? Maybe it's a later stage startup, or maybe it's a Zipcar-like thing, right? So I sort of like try to gravitate towards those just for a little bit more stability if possible. What I liked about Zipcar is like, A, the brand is awesome, right? The cool office in the seaports. One of the projects that I get to come lead there is essentially that sort of startup within the big company. And so join several like sort of top of funnel growth related teams. One of them is also launching a new product. The product is now called FlexCar, just sort of in between the Zipcar and a lease. So you can do like week and month rentals via Zipcar. And it was fun to get that off the ground. So I had a lot of fun. Unfortunately, I joined Zipcar in fall 2019. I'm in this thing called COVID, hit in winter, spring 2020. I was in the first of 2 or 3 layoff rounds that occurred. I think it was like maybe half of product engineering was in the first one. It was pretty brutal. It sucks, but it is what it is. You figure out how to get through it.
Not a lot of people renting cars in the middle of a pandemic. No one traveling.
No, and the people who are renting, they're usually existing customers. So the people like myself who are running sort of that top of funnel growth teams, there's no base to grow, as it turns out. So you don't necessarily need a growth team for that period of time. So it's fine. It is what it is.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know that Zipcar is actually owned by Avis, the big
Correct.
rental car company, and
and their revenue went to 0 basically in the course of 3 weeks. So yeah, it was a fascinating time to be part of in the travel space. I had a couple of friends also either in travel startups or like ran them because they were some had a forced exit. It's a pretty tough time to be in startups generally. I mean, honestly, Lola was pretty affected by it too, right? And so they had to sort of pivot quick. They've ended up at Capital One now, but yeah, it's just tough.
And so nowadays you're at Alteryx. Tell us about what you're doing there.
Yeah. So I talk with a guy named Max Cantor. He was the CEO of a startup called Feature Labs. So Alteryx buys that company, which is a feature engineering company. And they had bought that in the fall of 2019. So then I talk with Max shortly after the layoff round at Zipcar. This is like March, April of 2020. So Alteryx, it's a really fascinating company. It's been around really a long time. But I actually had not heard of the company literally at all. So I had to Google, what is this company? They're really known in that data analytics sort of no code space. So they target primarily the analysts. So like a business analyst, marketing analyst, and they help. There's a product called Designer that you download literally on your desktop is our big software. And it's a very no code, low code solution to do that prep, blend, merge, ETL like stuff so that you can go from your data all over the place to nice clean data. So then you can then go do further analysis. You could say Designer, we have partners, etc. But Alteryx wisely said for doing desktop software forever, we won't be a company forever. That's not how the world is moving. And so I've been trying to get into some cloud ventures. And one of those was via this acquisition, right? I am brought in, Max hires me essentially to do the thing where I've done a whole bunch of times in my past, which is the 0 to 1, 1 to 10 space. So, okay, we have this idea, this product. I did it at Hopon and a bunch of other places, right? It's like, how do we get it from literally nothing to a shipped product? And that's not only just the product and design, it's the engineering team, recruiting, processes, onboarding, pre-deployment, deployment, post-deployment, like all the things that go on with the lifecycle of like a product, working with sales and marketing, go-to-market motions, done that a bunch of times sort of at that stage. And so I'm brought in essentially to do that. So product is now in limited availability. It's called Alteryx Machine Learning, which is a auto ML product. Just plays in the space of the data robots, H2Os of the world, right? We have a little different tack because virtually like Alteryx as a company, we like to target that sort of business analyst like persona, that analyst. I was going to use a Gartner name, but I think they just changed the name. So I'm not going to use the new Gartner name for what they call this persona anymore. Offering smarts to just new workflows because what these analysts are doing, if you're in Excel or you're in Alteryx, right? You're doing things like, you're trying to find for fraud in transactions. You're doing lead scoring. You're doing all these sorts of analysis. These analyses tend to actually lend themselves well to machine learning problems. The problem is if you tell an analyst, hey, go build a machine learning model, they're going to run through for the hills, right? You're not going to have a non-technical analyst download Python and Jupyter notebooks and Scikit. You're not going to do that, right? Our tact is to say, hey, can we give them this machine learning? It's a web app. It's deployed in the cloud, right? Which is for Alteryx. It's like, oh, wow, we're doing cloud software, which is cool for Alteryx. And for me, I'm just like, this is all I've ever done in my career, right? It's just cloud software. It's so doing that. And these analysts to be able to say like, hey, just upload your data, nice, clean UI, UX, high explainability built in so that we can just walk them through generating a model of great graphs, vizzes, table, like the whole thing that we can draw really quick, amazing insights. then they can go build a report, do whatever, deploy it in production, work on that sort of stuff. That ended up being sort of that very much that startup in the big company again, which is what I was really enjoying doing. It's so like I started with a few people. Now the org is over 40, maybe we're close to 50 now, something like that. That's the big product I own. I also own a couple other ones that are sort of kicking off the ground, which is Promote, which is Alteryx's model management deployment software. And there's another new product we're getting kicked off the ground now, which is fun. Can't necessarily talk about that today, but we're continuing to build new stuff. It's been fun.
I had some experience rewinding back to when you were at Adobe, like dealing with Install Shield and getting things to like actually install on desktops, and hearing that you guys were still having to work with that at Alteryx. It can be so brutal. Like one version of a dependency doesn't line up on the installed desktop in Timbuktu, and you're trying to remotely figure out why. And that's a hard nut to crack.
Yeah. I mean, the flip side, the desktop software, though, is that from a go-to-market motion, you can say that you're dealing with customers' data, which is very sensitive. Say, if the data never leaves your desktop, or we have a piece of software called Alteryx Server, which is an on-prem like thing that you also install and deploy in your data center or wherever, it's a lot easier of a sell, right? That being said, the flip side of that, yes, you can say, from an IT security perspective, it's like, great. You can just deploy it, data stays there. No, the downside is then we have to distribute Designer on 1,000 desktops or laptops, right? And so pros and cons to everything. But the reality is like people expect their software to be in the cloud, just work. And so we're trying to get in that direction.
What would you say is the biggest challenge right now? Is it moving the stuff to the cloud? Is it finding enough talented software engineers to get the job done? Is it some other technological hurdle? What would you say?
Market's a little bit interesting right now. I think people read all about it. So, I mean, sure, I think I have like a dozen open roles. So, hey, if you're looking for a role, we're hiring lots at Alteryx. You need a lot of great software engineers. Come talk to me. But when you're doing a shift as a company, right? I mean, I could come in here, build software and ship it, right? We're an enterprise sales company, and that means a lot. I think that is like the go-to-market motion is like, it's a whole company effort for how you target customers, acquire them. Do we have desktop software? Oh, you could download a trial and there's a key that expires. That's not how cloud software works, right? And so do we have trial environments? There's this whole big sort of like customer success, account sales, and just that sort of motion is actually much more fascinating to me to see how we do it. My software today is more in sort of that net new software space. And there's other teams, like we have a cloud version of our Designer software, also desktop, and there's all like desktop versions. So the figuring about like, how do we do interop? Should we not? What works and what doesn't? That is a very interesting technical challenge as well. Not in my purview at Alteryx, but we sort of have to work through all those things. Building a platform in 2021, like I wouldn't say it's a solved problem because every platform is a little bit different, but you still have to build it. It's not even just my product teams, right? It is the infrastructure teams, platform services teams, everything has to be sort of in lockstep to like build or ship anything. So it's just 2,000 people, right? Or plus or minus at Alteryx. And so it takes a whole company effort to sort of move in that direction, but we're getting there and it's fun. I try to keep my teams, like I talked about the startup, is like, we are still trying to be that fast moving innovation startup thing in the big company. And we've been able to do a really high retention rate because the people who want to come do that. And it's also been, what's interesting is that I talk to a lot of engineers who are like, oh, but you're a machine learning thing. I don't know machine learning. And I say, sure, but I still got to build a React app. I still got to build backend services. There's a database tier. There's infrastructure, right? We've had a lot of success just saying like, hey, you want to learn ML? Great. If you're a great product engineer, come here because we still got to build the stuff and we'll teach you ML on the job. And that's been a sort of very nice pitch for engineers who want to break into the space.
Is there any advice that you would give young Doug back in his first job out of school at Adobe, like things you've learned over the years? What would you tell him?
Patience, I think, is the biggest thing. Younger Doug probably always thought he knew better than other people when Doug almost certainly did not. That's the thing of being 22, 23. It's great. You think you know everything, right? Patience and just learn. I mean, when one thing would go wrong or you'd have one bad month as a company or a week, it'd be like, oh, this is the worst. I have to find a new job. Where just like, that's just not how things work, right? Things ebb and they flow. They go up and they go down. You have to be able to ride these waves out. And I don't think I had as much patience when I was younger than I do now. And so that would be my one recommendation to younger Doug.
Yeah, that's probably the same thing I'd tell young Andrew.
Yeah. It's I wish we could figure out how to teach that to kids younger, but I just think it's one of the things you just kind of have to experience sometimes.
Yeah, you grind it out for a while and you figure it out.
Yep.
Now, when you were out in California, you also got some time to do some beer tourism.
Yes. It's funny when you're in college at Georgia Tech, right? I think my best beer. I would get like a Newcastle Brown Ale would be like my high, I'm going fancy beer tonight with a Newcastle, right? Not just a 30 rack of Natty, right? Then I moved to California and I'm in a tech company, right? And meet a bunch of friends and just like, oh yeah, this is the thing on IPA, right? So I get a bunch of this friend group that's just like huge beer nerds. They were home brewing, so then I got into home brewing, still do that today. One friend who's just got this like several 15-gallon setups, right? And this whole thing, I'm like, I'm not quite that hardcore. I don't quite the space for that at the home, so it's fine. You know, we would do these things like the Napa is great for wine, which are big wine fans, my wife and I, but also like beer, because there's, you know, Russian River Brewing Company's up there, Bay Republic, Lagunitas. So we would do a lot of, every year we do that. Pliny the Younger, which is that you have to go, we get the night before, we get up at like, 4 a.m., 5 a.m., go stand in line for 6 hours. And we wouldn't even be the first people in line at 5 a.m. to go get Pliny the Younger. It was a lot of fun. We would do the thing where it was stand in line, eventually get in, have a whole bunch of beer. They have really good pizzas there too. The best part about Santa Rosa, where they were in downtown, was there's a movie theater there. So when we were finally done, we would just go play movie theater roulette because it was, you could sit in a dark room and basically nap for what it's worth for like 2 hours. One year we had The Hobbit, I think, was out, and then we go, we get the 3-hour nap in the dark. It was a pretty good way to sober up before we had to drive back to the house. It was fun times.
My sister lives out in California. She's brought me some Pliny the Elder.
Yep.
But I believe the Younger is their special triple IPA.
And you can only get it there.
Yeah.
I know they do it for 2 weeks, like every February, every year, something like that. Yeah. So we would do that.
Only on draft, right?
And I think they would ship kegs occasionally to random bars and stuff around California. But yeah, basically you had to go there to get it.
All right. That's still on the bucket list for me.
February in California, especially in the wine country, you're like, well, not great, is better than February in Boston. Although that's not a high bar to cross, though.
True enough. You had a good quote about a house in California. You said you always rented when you were out there. Why was that?
Yeah, the market everywhere was crazy, but even out there, it's just like everybody I knew who owned a home and had an exit of some sort, like, you own a house? Where was your exit? Basically, that was what we asked everybody, which is mostly true unless you're going to go like super East Bay or super like towards Gilroy. Like if you want to be like in the core valley, you had to be there like forever or you had to have an exit, right? And then it's just like, that was the reality. That's what it was. I mean, and funny enough, of course, now we have our house because of a SurveyMonkey IPO exit, right? So it goes everywhere, right? But yeah, the Valley is a very expensive place to live. Not that Boston area is much better, but that's still like the top.
Yeah, it's stratospheric. It is becoming strange. Like when I think of what a house cost as a multiple of my dad's income.
It's like, I just don't think about it.
Back in the 70s.
No, you just don't think about it.
And what it does now.
Yeah.
It's insane.
Yeah. But the supply and demand, very little supply in the Valley and a lot of demand. And so San Francisco is also trying to reconcile with all that actively. Interesting problem for them to solve.
Not making any more land.
No, and it's now in the remote world, it's fascinating. I know a lot of people who moved out, gone to Austin or other places, because like it turns out we all thought you had to be in the office to do most of these jobs. I'm like, I've been remote at Alteryx the entire time. We've done a couple meetups here and there, but even if we're actually building out a Boston office, I might go in 1 day a week. Because the reality is all my teams are like quarter in Boston, a quarter in New York, a quarter in the Denver area, a quarter everywhere else. It's like we've kind of just figured out how to do this remote thing. And yes, I used to meet up and do the in-person social stuff, get to know people occasionally. But we've been pretty effective figuring out how to be basically full remote. And so it'll be very interesting to see what happens in the Valley over the medium-term sense.
I would guess, especially with like real estate for homes and for office space in the Valley being stratospheric and pretty high here, that tech companies will latch onto and stay remote. I've heard some FinServ companies, though, that are like, get back in the office January 3rd.
I've known some people who've just said, like, I'm being forced back in, I'm quitting. They figure out how to work remote. So like, why do I need to do this? And they're like, no, we must have you be in office. Otherwise, we don't know if you're working. I'm like, okay, good luck with that one. You're going to retain nobody ever at this point. So, yeah, that's their decision to make.
So thank you very much, Doug, for coming down and recording with us, sharing your stories and experiences with the listeners of Underserved.
Thank you for having me. It's been great being here, and have a happy holiday.
All right. And we'll talk to everyone soon on the next episode of Underserved.
Thank you for listening to the Underserved podcast. For more information on the topics discussed and for show notes, visit the show website, underserved.fm. And please be sure to rate, like, and subscribe to Underserved on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.